Hi, I'm Colin Sanders and this is the History Books Review. I'm continuing my extended review of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and we've reached the second part of chapter 26, the Huns attack. The origins of the Huns is obscure. Gibbon traces it back to the early 1st century when they were known as the Tanju and lived on the borders of China just north of the Great Wall. This was not a coincidence. The Tanju were a force to be reckoned with. They had put together a vast coalition of steppe peoples via diplomacy, war and straightforward intimidation. They had become powerful enough that they threatened to overthrow the ruling dynasty in China itself. The first wall built by the Chinese was a specific response to this threat. This was far from an overreaction. China had already been conquered by tribes from the north once, and later in history the Mongols were going to succeed in doing so again. The Tanju were able to apply very direct and effective pressure on the Chinese, extracting substantial gifts from their civilized but unwarlike southern neighbours. These included, most humiliatingly, noble princesses as marriage partners for top Tanju chieftains. This was both a sign of desperation on the part of the Chinese and a very useful tool for legitimising a Tanju takeover should the opportunity present itself. And with anywhere between 200,000 and 300,000 horsemen available to the Tanju and able to move quickly in unison into China, any opportunity could be quickly and ruthlessly exploited. But in the contest between the Chinese and the Tanju, the Chinese were not without cards that could be played by an able and effective leader. And, as it happened, just such a leader appeared. Coyote came to the throne via a career in the Chinese army and set about mobilising the military resources at his disposal for a preemptive strike against the tribesmen. He marched into the territory of the Tanju, took them by surprise and massacred them. It was a hard-fought battle with heavy Chinese losses, largely as a result of operating far from their supply lines, but it broke the prestige of the Tanju. He backed up this victory with diplomatic overtures to the allies of the Tanju. This robbed them of their power and reduced them to effectively tributaries of the Chinese Empire. Such a rapid and complete reversal of their fortunes was hard to stomach, and a portion of the Tanju set out towards the west to escape the power of the Chinese and to seek new lands to conquer and to carve out a new kingdom to replace the one that they had lost. That, at any rate, is Gibbon's version. There is in reality nothing that actually positively identifies the Huns of the 4th century with the Tanju of the 1st, other than a similarity in the names. If you don't think they sound very similar, the Chinese version of their name would have been pronounced Hanu. 300 years would have been long enough to mix up any heritage they might have shared a fair bit. Nomads tend to move around a lot, so it isn't particularly difficult to believe that there was some kind of affinity between the two groups, but whether a direct narrative linking them makes any sense is questionable. But it does fit in nicely with the story that Gibbon is telling, because what is certain is that the Huns appear as if from nowhere and radically change the course of the history of the Roman Empire and the wider history of the whole of Europe. Whatever their origin and their motivation, there is no doubting their courage and determination, nor their ruthlessness. The first obstacle to their westward advance was the large and formidable kingdom of the Alans. The Alans were themselves a nomadic people, but one with a fairly well-established domain. They occupied a big chunk of what is now central Russia, to the north of the Caspian Sea and stretching as far as the Black Sea and the Aral Sea. They had been there a long time and they were related to the Persians, but they didn't show any particular favour to their relatives and often raided or even invaded Persia. They were equally a threat to both the ancient Greeks and later to the Romans. They were referred to as the Scythians and the Sarmatians at various times in their history, which was a long one. In fact, it lasted pretty much up until the Huns arrived and destroyed them in 370, give or take a few years. Had the Huns done nothing else, that alone would have secured their place in history. The Alans were largely incorporated into the Huns from then on, though some fugitives escaped to Germany, where they would shortly join forces with the Vandals for an assault on the Roman Empire. Another group took refuge in a mountainous region of the Caucasus, where they survived undisturbed until they were massacred by the Mongols in the 14th century. However, some escaped, and today their descendants comprise the population of South Ossetia. Taking over the position formerly occupied by the Alans was significant for the Alans themselves, but for outsiders it simply replaced one ethnic group with another. But for the Huns it was only the first step. Next, they attacked the extensive Gothic kingdom only recently united under the reign of the elderly Hermanric. This stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea and on paper appeared to be quite capable of defending itself. But the only thing holding it together was one elderly man. Hermanric's long reign had put together an impressive coalition, but it had never yet had to face a challenge like the one presented by the Huns. In this crisis it began to fracture even before the fighting started, and Hermanric himself was injured by a personal feud with some nobles provoked by his attempt to maintain unity. This meant that when the Huns actually attacked, it wasn't the wily and intelligent Hermanric they faced, but his inexperienced successor, Withyma. In a huge pitched battle, Withyma was completely defeated, the only redeeming feature of the fatal day being that the infant king of the Goths was saved by a couple of courageous warriors, Alatheus and Saphrax, who also managed to escape with a large chunk of the people of the Goths. The Huns still had an undefeated Visigothic kingdom to face, and so the Goths of Hermanric were able to escape for now under the leadership of the Guardians of the Prince. The Huns rapidly finished off the Visigoths under Athanaric. The Goths are often considered to be, and indeed were, barbarians, but compared to the Huns they were positively civilized. They had adopted many things from the Romans, including Christianity. They knew the Romans and were in constant contact with them. The Huns had no interest in any activity besides subsistence and fighting. They worshipped a naked sword plunged into the ground. The Goths found them so inhuman that they supposed them to be the offspring of witches and demons, and now they expected nothing from them but death or slavery. Alatheus and Saphrax realized that there was only one place that they could be safe. For centuries the German tribes had maintained their independence, but now only the walls of the Roman Empire held out any prospect of protection from the Huns. They set out towards the south on the extraordinary project of surrendering their freedom in exchange for the protection of the empire.